We're going to talk the biggest question marks facing the Oklahoma Sooners heading into 2022, including which is the team that's going to give them the biggest fits this year. We got Chisholm Holland from 1077, the franchise in Oklahoma City, joining us on today's episode of Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Sooners Nation? Thank you for joining me and welcome to Locked On Sooners. My name is John Williams. You can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Sooners. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, also available on YouTube as well. And joining us today, filling in for Josh, who's on a bit of a vacation, is Chisholm Holland from 1077, the franchise in Oklahoma City, here to talk questions facing the Oklahoma Sooners and the team that we got to worry about the most heading into 2022. Chisholm, thanks for joining the show. Glad to have you, man.
Man, thank you. I appreciate it. Now, Helmer does a good job, so I don't know if I'm going to quite be able to stick up for that, but I'll try to add like a few more puns or something. Add something different.
There you go. We need more puns because I bring a lot of wrestling references that Josh didn't always get. Throw some puns out there.
90s video games are usually like my sweet spot. I can make a lot of those jokes. We can do all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Speaking of 90s video games, what was like your favorite, your go-to on a Friday night? You needed to play a video game. What were you going to play?
Sure. So like as a kid, I grew up like in the Pokemon area, like right when that started, like the originals. So like small child. And then when I got older, Halo was like the thing in high school. And so me and my buddies would crank out Halo, obviously with NCAA football. Those were like the two big ones.
Yeah. I think Halo 3 was legit. That was probably for like, I'm in grad school a little bit after that. But in high school, it was all about Super Smash Brothers. And then my brothers and I would play WrestleMania 2000 on the Nintendo 64.
Yeah.
So that was always legit. Let's talk, man. Spring ball's over. Summer is underway. We're still 3 months out from the start of the regular season. And everybody's feeling pretty positive about the Oklahoma Sooners. You look in most publications, and they're the favorite. I mean, they're the betting favorite. Per Bet Online, they've got one of the highest win total projections, according to betonline.net, one of our sponsors here on the show. So there's got to be some questions, though, right? This is not a perfect team. They had a ton of turnover. So when you're looking at this roster heading into the summer, getting ready for fall, what's one of the biggest question marks facing the Oklahoma Sooners, according to you?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the positivity is totally warranted, right? Like, I get the excitement of Brent Venables, a guy who the fan base is familiar with coming back. And then some like the things that were like pillars of this program that just frankly went away these past 5 years, seeming to make a return. So I think the excitement's warranted. Now, to your point, like if you actually look at the team, tons of talent, right? Tons of names that we like, but also just teams that we're not totally proven of. Like we don't know exactly what's going to happen with them as far as at certain positions. And so when I think about like biggest question marks for this team, I think the offensive line, like Matauer coming in as a transfer, played a lot of football in the Pac-12. You assume he's going to make the transition to the Big 12, but Wanya Morris, a guy at Tennessee who was super hyped up. I mean, like you would have thought that they had just gotten Trent Williams all over again whenever he made that announcement. They can't get on the field, right? Like when they had to go to the bench, they went to Eric Swinson before they went to him. And so he was really disappointing last year and now coming into the right tackle starting job, and seems like everything's going well there. And then for me, the thing that I'm most excited to see is the safety position, because we saw zero rotation there at all last year. And I disagreed with it, but the reasoning of it was I want two guys. This is Grinch logic. I want two guys who I can trust, who aren't going to make mistakes. So maybe the ceiling isn't as high, but the floor is very, very high. Like that was the Pat Fields, Delarian Turner-Yell, era of OU football was I'm not going to make mistakes, but I might not make plays. Well, now you're bringing back Key Lawrence to play safety, one of the most explosive guys we've had in the secondary. Had some blown coverages, which Grinch loved to point out about Key. Had some blown coverages, but every time he's out there, forced fumbles, got interceptions, had one of the highest turnover rates per play in the country. And then you have a guy like Billy Bowman, who was a receiver in high school, flipped to the other side of the ball, played three positions last year, got benched the second half of the season, and now is playing a fourth position that he did not play at all last season, and now is going to be a starter on the back end. Like all of that, you could put a positive spin on. Giant question marks, though. Like all of that could blow up in their face, and all of that could be giant issues that sneak up on them over the course of the season. So excitement, yes, but like real serious things that we need to like talk about and highlight these first 4 or 5 weeks of the season. I think you have to.
Yeah, I think Key Lawrence moving into a starting role, getting full-time snaps is going to be huge for this team. As you mentioned, it's a guy that made a lot of plays and he brought an energy, like his physicality was a very welcomed presence in the second half of the season. Even though they lost their only 2 games in the second half, I feel like he did a lot of what kind of like Ronnie Perkins did the year before, just brought a different edge and toughness. Yes, you're going to have some blown coverages sometimes with guys that play as aggressive as he does. At the same time, you also bounced him back from cornerback to safety to playing a little nickel to playing some small linebacker. Like he rotated around too and wasn't able to get fully comfortable. Now you line him up as a box safety and just allow him to play one position. And I think that's going to really benefit a guy who plays fast. You take away some of the road, moving around on the defense, and he can settle into one spot. And I think that's going to really benefit him a lot. You mentioned Billy Bowman. The dude got thrown into the fire.
Yeah.
And of course, things didn't go great.
This is like the meanest thing a coaching staff has ever done to a true freshman.
Right. This is
play him outside corner, struggles, never sees the field again. Like, what did you expect?
Exactly. And this is a guy that came in as a two-way player, and he wasn't fully dedicated as a defensive back in high school either. He was playing a lot of wide receiver. And so, of course, he was going to have some issues. But I really like what Brent Venables did with him and said, hey, no, we're making him a safety and we're sticking him at safety. And for better or worse, he's a safety. And you want that for a young guy before you start moving him around and asking him to do too much. You want him to get comfortable at least with one position. Tawanya Morris, I mean, my former co-host and I, David Walker, last year when Wanya Morris transferred in, we're projecting the offensive line. And I remember David and I talking about this, saying, we're going to spend a lot. If Wanya Morris isn't one of the starting offensive linemen for this team, we're spending a lot of time talking about Wanya Morris. And sure enough, it just didn't work out. Now you had Anton Harrison emerge. You had some different pieces that moved around on the offensive line that you could use. But yeah, it's good to see that he's progressing and actually going to be able to step into a role this year, because that's a piece that you expected to be a big time producer for you last year that wasn't. And maybe, and it was kind of weird with all the Tennessee guys, right? Like Eric Gray had a ton of hype in the spring last year, saw a lot of touches in the first 3-4 games of the season. And then again, much like Billy Bowman, almost was like forgotten the rest of the year. Key Lawrence, was strong at times, but also forgotten at times. He only played the 10th most snaps on the defense. And so just a really weird year all the way around for those 3 guys that transferred in. But I think you're right. I think the optimism is warranted. But I do think that, we still have some things.
I think it's more of a culture optimism as opposed to roster optimism, right? Like that's the way I've always tried to phrase it. Like, do you like Brent Venables more than Lincoln Riley? Yeah, sure, fine. Yeah. Like I'm on board with that. But like, did Lincoln Riley leave a bunch of holes when he left? Yes. Was the team degrading? Like the recruiting was better, but the team was worse. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but in my eyes, like every year Lincoln was there, the recruiting was better, but the team was performing worse. And so like Brent Venables is having to address that. And that's not an overnight fix, especially with the way that he has decided to attack the transfer portal. Yeah.
And I think the thing that is kind of working in Oklahoma's favor this year is that pretty much every team has questions in the Big 12. You look at the top of the conference, and Oklahoma State lost their defensive coordinator, the guy that really was the architect of that
Jim
team.
Knowles, yeah.
Jim Knowles going to Ohio State. Yes, they brought in a really talented defensive coordinator in Derek Mason, but you lost Malcolm Rodriguez as well. So you lost the 2 leaders on your defense. That's not too easy to replace. And you look at Baylor, they lost a lot of key pieces on both sides of the ball. Jalen Petrie, Terrell Bernard, Abram Smith, Tristan Ebner. They made a switch at quarterback. They lost Tyquan Thornton. Texas, their defense was terrible last year. Are they going to be good enough for that offense to actually work out? Is this going to look a lot like the Oklahoma teams that were having to win 52-49 in order to win games? I mean, we think Quinn Ewers is going to be good, but we don't know that. And so I think that's working in Oklahoma's favor a little bit. Yes, They had a ton of turnover as well, but I think they've got enough stability at the most important pieces. I mean, you're looking at your offensive line. If you have one question mark on your offensive line, you're doing pretty good.
Sure.
If you lost a lot of guys on defense, especially on the defensive line, but you have a lot of guys that people are really excited about that have a lot of promise. And we got to see that against Oregon, and we got to see it in the spring game that these guys, especially off the edge, they're going to bring the heat. And I think that's really promising. And so while, yes, there are a lot of questions, there's a lot of teams in the Big 12 that have question marks too. And we're going to get to that after the break. We're going to talk about which team Chisholm thinks is going to be the team to most give Oklahoma difficulty. But first, I want to talk to you about Built Bar. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar ever. And they've recently come out with Built granola bars. If you haven't tried these, I highly recommend them. Like I've been telling you about Built Bar for a couple years now. I've been eating it myself. But as soon as these granola bars came out, I ordered 2 boxes of them, got the chocolate peanut butter, got the chocolate coconut, and they're fantastic. Highly recommend. My wife loves them as well. The kids, they eat them up. I got to hide them because the kids are after them all the time. And so I'd really recommend go to built.com, use promo code LOCK15, get 15% off your next order at built.com. You can get 150 calories, 15 grams of protein, and only 4 grams of sugar with Built granola bars. And myself, I love granola. Like, I'm that kind of guy. I'll eat it for cereal, for breakfast. I'll have it as a snack. And so this just hits home for me every single time. So go to built.com, use promo code LOCK15, get 15% off your next order at built.com. And so we're here with Chisholm Holland, 1077 The Franchise. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Chisholm Holland as well. And you can hear him 3 to 6 Monday through Friday with Ryan Chapman. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Okay.
yeah. Me and Chapman getting after it. Yeah.
Yeah. So Ryan Chapman of OU Insider. So not OU Insider.
SI Sooners.
That's right. SI Sooners.
All Sooners, yeah.
I try to keep track of everybody because everybody
they move around too much.
Yeah, well, and I mean, everybody does such great work. There's so many great, writers and podcasters and radio people in Sooners Nation. We're truly blessed, to have such great coverage across the board. And so, yeah, Ryan, he does a fantastic job. Make sure you check him out.
I always tell guys like Hoover and Ryan and all those guys who work on those websites, you guys aren't allowed to complain about the transfer portal. Everyone else can complain. Everybody else sticks with what their job is for a while. You website people move around so much, I can never keep it straight. Officers Bills work for 5 different publications. You just can't do it. So you guys are not allowed to say anything.
Well, hey, I've only been at Sooners Wire and Locked On Sooners, so we're going to stick it out.
You're stable.
We're program guys here on Locked On Sooners, coming up on our 2-year anniversary here on the podcast, 1-year anniversary with Sooners Wire. So, all right, Chisholm, we just talked about each team in the Big 12, especially at the top, has a question mark.
Sure.
But who's the team that you're looking at that you think is going to give Oklahoma the biggest fits in 2022?
Yeah, so it's tough. The Big 12 is a little bit of a wild card for me this year. Last year coming into it, I felt so great about Oklahoma State because of the returning production, the names that we knew, the expectation the defense was going to take a step forward after being really good the year before. And I feel like that was an obvious layup prediction. Dave Aranda turning that thing around overnight, I thought they were going to be better. Never in my wildest dreams would I pick them to win the Big 12. And so I think that's a little thing that you have to look at. And so whenever I'm coming into this, obviously I do the same offseason work that everybody else does of trying to preview of who I think is going to be pretty good. And so what do? You default to the teams who were good last year. And so I've been wrestling with Baylor all offseason about what I think they're going to be. Well, Bill Conley did us a favor and last week came out with his returning production numbers from ESPN.com. And if 131 teams, Baylor's 122nd in the country, right? So they have the 10th least production coming back. Below them is West Virginia and Iowa State, who has the 3rd least production coming back. Obviously, they had that huge graduating class that carried so much weight for them. Oklahoma State, who I thought was bringing back a lot of guys, big names gone, but depth was there, right? Guys who played a bunch of snaps, plus Trace Ford coming back from injury. 107th, right? Bottom 30. Oklahoma is actually 3rd in the Big 12 at 58, which is right in the middle of the country. Mm-hmm. So they've got a huge advantage, as crazy as it is to sound, with all the turnover they've had. They've got more continuity than basically anyone in the Big 12 outside of Kansas, barely counts, and TCU. And TCU was awful last year. So, of course they have a lot of guys coming back. They were bad. They played a lot of bad young players, which is fine for growth and development. So, first off, I guess it comes down to what you think about the TCU hire, because you could probably put some of the same logic that was used with Baylor last year with TCU, which is they were a young team. They struggled. They've recruited okay. So, these aren't Kansas level players. These are middle of the road college football players who took their lumps last year, and maybe they take a jump. Maybe Chandler Morris is the 4th best quarterback in the Big 12. That'd be huge for them. So you could try to do that with TCU. I'm not sold on the coaching hire, so that's not going to be me. So then you're really kind of projecting forward. I don't believe in Texas. I think the Quinn Ewers thing is interesting, but The offensive line, I just frankly think is going to be awful, like just awful. As bad as OU fans have complained about the offensive line the past 2 years, I mean, this is going to be so much worse. They might start 3 true freshmen on the offensive line at Austin. In Austin, 3 true freshmen. That's insane.
Yeah.
It's like I refuse to go there. So I just defaulted back to Baylor. And that's just a Dave Aranda belief, despite the fact that they're putting in Blake Shapen, who looked like Joe Montana for a half against Oklahoma State. So I think that's probably not who he's going to be. But if he is, chalk him up for a national championship. But Dave Aranda's a smart guy. And so I think he's going to be able to figure some things out. I think they've recruited middle 30s for the past 4 years. And he's just going to be able to kind of jump on top of it. And he's got momentum, which I think is a really important thing in college football, especially for a small program like Baylor. So I think their offense is going to be a little bit better. Their defense might be a little bit worse, so maybe it's a wash. The only other team I entertained is like a sneaky who could give Oklahoma trouble who we're not talking about, right? Because everyone's going to say Baylor, Oklahoma State, Texas. Like those are the layups. So what do you think about this one, John? West Virginia, who's bringing back 127th best, most production in the country, which is low, but they're bringing the most production in the Big 12 out of the transfer portal. Uh-huh. So they're bringing in the most known commodities. They have JT Daniels, obviously Graham Harrell. Like, I thought their defense was fine last year. God knows they ran 45 slant routes against Oklahoma down in Norman and just carved up Alex Grinch's defense by running the same play over and over and over. So I'm sure their offense is going to be a little bit more creative this upcoming season. I like Neil Brown. I know I'm on that island. I think the West Virginia situation is bad, but Neil Brown is a good coach. So just as a team that could be hovering around 7, 8, 9 wins that people don't see coming, I like the West Virginia spot because they I don't know if you've looked at their schedule. It lines out pretty well. Like they have a pretty favorable schedule of like when these difficult games fall for them.
It's funny you mentioned West Virginia. That's the team I've been kind of pounding the table as a dark horse.
Okay.
For the last couple of months here on the show because. And some of this was even before JT Daniels. I just like their defensive front. Now, this is also before I realized that Akeem Mesidor transferred to Miami, but you still got Dante Stills. Like, that dude's a dude. Like, he's going to be a top 100, top 50 draft pick when he finally declares. I thought he was going to declare this last year, but I think even in the 2023 NFL draft, the guy's going to be a top 50 pick. He's just that good of a player. And yeah, the JT Daniels thing, it helps raise their profile and it makes them a much, much better team. And I'm interested in West Virginia. I think they're going to have some really tough games, but they're going to pull out some of those as well. You know, they played okay at times. I mean, they held Oklahoma to 13 points last year with an offense that was pretty good for the most part, even though it had its inconsistencies. I mean, it was really good at times, and they held Oklahoma to 13 points. And so I would not put it past them to give some of the teams like a Texas, whoever they have at home in Morgantown, that's going to be a tough game for whoever's visiting. It always is. And I would not be surprised to see them jump up and make a push for the Big 12 championship. I think on Texas's front, yeah, the offensive line issue is questionable. The defense to me is as big of an issue, if not, because I don't know if they can make a significant enough jump from last year when they were one of the worst in the country to make it equitable for Quinn Ewers. Like, you don't want to put all your eggs in the Quinn Ewers basket. You got to hope that your defense makes the jump to top 60, top 50, at least. Like, that's a minimum. And I think Oklahoma's got to make the same jump, but I feel like there's a lot of confidence because of Brent Venables. Like, you don't expect Oklahoma's defense to be worse than it was last year. You expect it to be better despite all the guys they lost on defense. Yeah. And so, West Virginia, that's a very, very intriguing team. Back to your point.
Defense thing, though, I just quickly, I've talked about that. I interview people all the time, and I don't know who's sending the money. I don't know what briefcases they're from, but Pete Kwiatkowski, the defensive coordinator of Texas, is sending it to all the media members. And somehow I got missed. I didn't get the money. But, like, people talk about that guy like it's like, hey, no, look, it was year one. Kwiatkowski's going to be able to figure this out. He's a really smart guy. And so that's just me taking football people at their word. Like, there's a lot of people who are a lot smarter than I am. And there's a lot of belief that he's going to be able to turn that thing around. To your point, though, frankly, I didn't see it last year. Like, there's some big creative defensive coordinator in there who's going to be able to scheme up an awesome defense that's struggling in the talent department, which, frankly, Texas is. It didn't show itself last year. And so, like, if he's that smart, that's fine. Then why did Kansas put up 40?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, there's got to be a little bit more to it, too. So I agree with you, man. There's an undercurrent of like Texas defense is going to be better because of the coordinator. Maybe that's true. He just didn't prove it last year.
Well, and this was also the same unit that had that big locker room blow up, like where they leaked the audio recording of the Texas defensive line coach. I mean, that you're talking about a lot of the same situation that's going on
3
there.
weeks ago, they had a player call out like, "Hey, we've got all these freshmen hanging out on 6th Street, partying instead of working hard," and they banned that player from talking to the media.
Right.
Like, this does not sound like a healthy place. I'm sorry. It just does not.
Right. He's not your problem. The guy talking and trying to call out his team for not taking it seriously enough. He's not your problem.
Most people call that leadership. No, Steve Sarkisian, he calls it a distraction.
Yeah, exactly. I want to make a point about Dave Aranda and the Baylor Bears a little bit. So I went back to, look at Ole Miss versus LSU the last, couple years when Jeff Lebby was the offensive coordinator. I believe they kind of crossed paths in 2019. If I'm not mistaken. So in that year, LSU won, but of course LSU beat everybody that year because they had the greatest offense of all time. But Jeff Lebby did put 37 points up on the board. So there's that. Like, I don't know if Dave Aranda's great, but we saw Jeff Lebby's offense succeed in the SEC. I think he's going to be able to do the same in the Big 12, even if it's a different conference, different players, different scheme that he's going to be going up against week to week. Jeff Lebby's had success as an offensive coordinator everywhere he's gone. It's going to be good for Oklahoma to get a bit of a fresh perspective on offense as they head into Big 12 play because, I mean, it's fair to say teams knew what Lincoln Riley wanted to run. And now there's a whole new different identity for this Oklahoma Sooners offense heading into the 2022 season. Anybody else you want to talk about? Do you want to mention on that before we, break and then kind of talk about our next couple topics?
Oh, if you listen to me on the air, my addiction's Kansas State. I just can't quit them. I can't quit Manhattan. Maybe it's because I've been there twice and I've just had a blast. Like, Manhattan's an awesome place to go watch a football game in. The stadium is in a hole. Like, it's so Kansas State. Like, it meets every stereotype you could imagine. The kids, have you been to a game in Manhattan?
No.
Dude, the student section where they tailgate before the game, they call it the mud pit. And I mean, it's a mud pit. Like, they intentionally don't grow grass there. They put the sprinklers on. They make it a mud pit before the game, and that's where all it's perfect. Like, it is a perfect atmosphere. So I'm in love with Kansas State. But Coach Kleiman is a guy who I think is pretty smart. He got a pretty tough rap at the end of the year last year. But the biggest thing for them is their defense was good enough. Their offensive skill position, they've got players who Oklahoma would like to have on their roster. Like, they have good players. They just can't stay healthy at quarterback.
Yeah,
they can't. And now they've gotten a guy, Nicholas Martinez, who
Adrian
Martinez, sorry. Yeah, good point. Adrian Martinez, going into the Nebraska game, I did the whole, everyone knows his name, but he is an overrated quarterback, which I still believe. But here's the one thing that Adrian Martinez is bringing that Kansas State has not had. He doesn't miss games.
Right.
He plays. And that is such a breath of fresh air for Kleiman, who can't find a way to not play Howard, who not any good, and he played a majority of their snaps last year for the second year in a row with Skylar Thompson missing time. So Kansas State's a team who I just always like. Their schedule also, I think, is broke pretty well for them as far as when do they play Texas, when do they play Oklahoma State, when do they play OU, when's their bye week fall. I think all that kind of went favorable. So it's just picking one of those teams, right? Those 4 through 8 Big 12 teams. Who wins the games against the other 4 through 8 Big 12 teams? Because that's going to be probably your third best team in the conference, more than likely.
Right.
Who is that? And so that's a hard thing to guess. My gut says it's going to be Kansas State or West Virginia. I just don't know which one, but I'm always a little tempted by the Wildcats. I don't know what it is.
Well, Chris Kleiman, he's had a lot of success, and he's had success against OU. He seems to get the most out of his teams, and so there's a lot of promise there.
And they might have the best individual pass rusher in the conference, which is, don't sleep on that. And Deuce Vaughn's explosive and all the stuff.
Yeah, they've got a lot of talent there, that's for sure. If Adrian Martinez can keep the ball from going to the other team, if he can take care of the football, then they'll be pretty good, I think. Yeah. So we got a couple more topics we want to touch on here with Chisholm before we go. So Chisholm, let's talk one thing that you guys talked about on the radio on 107.7 The Franchise in Oklahoma City with Ryan Chapman. The out-of-conference games that you want to make happen for Oklahoma when they move to the SEC. Yeah. So, I mean, the obvious one, I think, for a lot of Oklahoma fans and for me in particular is Oklahoma State. But what were some of your suggestions?
Yeah, so if you're unfamiliar, the next 10 years, after 2023, because that's when everyone assumes they're going to make the jump. But That's a little fuzzy, right? But basically 2024 on, those next 10 years, they have 5 games scheduled against SEC opponents. Well, they're not going to play Alabama in the non-con and then, turn around and play an SEC schedule. So those are going to get moved. So Oklahoma is going to have to do this crazy thing that electors hate doing, which is finding non-conference games 3 years in advance because, we got to schedule these things out 15 years.
That's right.
It drives me crazy. So yeah, I mean, it's a big thing. And so we got a lot of like the Big 12 schools, right? Like some of those rivalries. People want to see Baylor. People want to see Oklahoma State. The bad blood with the Oklahoma State thing. So we talked about this today, right? And we got a lot of Oklahoma State. Got to keep Bedlam as a non-con game. We got to do it every year. And if you remember when OU announced they're going to the SEC, there was a whole like back channel and over Oklahoma State's dead body. Are they going to play OU in the non-con? Like they're not going to do it because they're so upset. So I shot a couple text messages after the show today just because that was such a popular answer. And that's largely still the case. There's still a lot of animosity at this moment about the possibility of playing Bedlam as a non-con game. So we'll see if that works itself out. Time heals all wounds. And at the end of the day, whenever you get to cash a big check, you cash a big check. You know what I mean? So we'll see. But some of the other stuff is like teams who Oklahoma hasn't played, like Penn State. Like they haven't played Penn State in a really long time. They've never played Michigan State ever. Notre Dame is a popular team that people like. Notre Dame's a team that, a lot of people said they should play every 4 years and just kind of on a rotation home and home schedule. It was a lot of Big Ten teams, which I find interesting that people kind of gravitated towards. I want to play Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State. I want to go up against Michigan State, who they've never played. There was a lot of pull that direction and not a lot of ACC teams. And frankly, no teams in the Northwest at all. Like nobody wanted Oregon. We didn't have a lot of that. We had a couple of those this afternoon, but mostly just making, onside kick jokes.
Yeah.
And the USC thing, which if Oklahoma called USC tomorrow and said, hey, we've got this Alabama game in 2031 or whatever year it is, and we're not going to be able to play it. Would you want to be on our non-conference schedule over USC's dead body? Are they answering that phone? So I would say that's a little bit of a pipe dream, but it was mostly like keeping some Big 12 rivalries alive. I think that'll fade, right? Like that feels good now, but will anybody want to play Baylor in 2030? Dave Aranda might not be there anymore. Who knows what that program looks like? The Oklahoma State thing, but tons of Big Ten teams, which I didn't know if that was like an accidental trend or if that was like maybe like the back of OU's head going like, we really like the way the Big Ten plays football.
Yeah. Well, I think some of it might be just the connection to the Big 8, like
Sure.
Nebraska's in the Big 10. And so maybe it just feels like almost like a brotherhood or they're cousins to Oklahoma football almost, because that was a lot of what Oklahoma football was about, is that you run the football, you play tough defense, and that's Oklahoma football. And that's a lot of what the Big 10 is. And it's, I think you look back in, the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, it's a lot of Big 10 powers, that were predominant things that people watched, whether it was the Big 10 in the Rose Bowl or, big non-conference matchups. I think, I can think back to the 90s, like living in California, Michigan was huge. Like Michigan, a popular team to watch a lot, because of Desmond Howard and then Charles Woodson. Like they were really, really a fun team to watch. And so maybe it's just like my generation thinks really like fondly of Michigan just from those times going to the Rose Bowl. I think one that would be really, really interesting is Colorado. Like this is a team that we haven't played in a decade. We got Nebraska. We're going to play Texas A&M and Missouri in the SEC. Why not bring back a Colorado matchup? Like that would be a really fun kind of reuniting of old Big 12 foes.
Do you know what's like a one that I was not prepared for, but was really popular? 2 teams in the Big 10. We got a bunch of Wisconsin and Iowa.
Okay.
And I think that is 100% people being like, I love the way Wisconsin plays football, and I want to see OU play against that team, right? And I love the way Iowa plays football, and but like tons of Iowa and Wisconsin love. And I think that's because it's like the perfect middle ground of like a team I really respect with a big name, but I also think OU would beat them like 9 times out of 10.
Right.
And like I think that's what it is. It's like OU fans trying to thread the needle there, but lots of Wisconsin Badger love.
It's like the excitement of playing Tennessee. Like
yes, it's the perfect level.
Like Tennessee's, it's a good name. They've been something at some point in time, but they're not quite good enough to worry about early in the season to knock you off of your national championship run. So I think it's fun. I think it's really fascinating. Another team, just from my own perspective, my grandfather was a Virginia Tech alum, back when the
Oh,
school
let's go to
called it.
Blacksburg, man.
Yeah,
Put
when
me
they,
on a plane. I would
that's
be there in
right.
a heartbeat.
I mean, who wouldn't love to be there for Inner Sandman? Like that would
Yeah.
be such a fantastic atmosphere against a team. And there's a bit of a connection, Shane Beamer, a beloved coach, his father is a legend there in Blacksburg, and just kind of fun. I don't know. I would love to see Oklahoma play Virginia Tech and get to see the Hokies on a Saturday night in Blacksburg. That'd be kind of fun.
I do actually. So I think some of these teams are frankly a little bit of a pipe dream.
Yeah.
I wish, I've always talked about this. Like, I wish I could find Joe Castiglione's favorite drink, get into a cigar lounge with him, and just pump him full of them one night and get some honesty.
Yeah.
Once he makes the jump to the SEC, like they're scheduling Alabama and Georgia and LSU and Ohio State for a reason, right? It's because they play the Big 12, and like that's held against them a lot. And a majority of their schedule just frankly isn't very interesting and isn't going to be on national television and isn't going to get the congratulations, you beat Kansas State, which they struggled with here recently, but you know what I mean? Like, not flashy schedule. So they're trying to make up for that a little bit in the non-con. Once they make the jump to the SEC, a lot of those SEC teams go cupcake, right? Like Alabama has here recently, which credit to them, has been doing the Florida State, has been doing the Miami, which, isn't exactly like the hardest game they ever got, but they've been doing a little bit more. I'm wondering if OU does that, or do they go back to like let's play the Citadel. We're going to play McNeese States. We'll finish it up with Rutgers, and we'll call it a non-con. I wonder what the actual school policy, or not policy, but strategy is going to be, because playing LSU and Texas A&M and Missouri is a whole lot harder than playing TCU and Tech and Baylor.
And I think that's one of the intriguing aspects of the potential college football playoff expansion discussion is if teams get kind of like not just one loss, but maybe two losses, and they can still make a playoff. Like, I think teams are going to be more aggressive in scheduling interesting non-conference games. One, because there's better paydays. Like, you get a better payday from playing a Miami down there in South Florida versus playing the Citadel or playing Tulane or Tulsa.
Sure.
No disrespect to Tulsa, but
the Golden Hurricane fan are going to come after you, man. Be careful.
Hey, please come after.
2 dozen of them are going to.
Make sure you leave a lot of comments on the YouTube site. So I think that's one of the fascinating aspects of it is that if you expand the playoff, you give people a little bit more leeway, you're going to see more interesting matchups. And I think that's why so many people are so excited about the SEC move is like all these dream matchups are now going to be a regular thing for the Oklahoma Sooners. I mean, they've got the non-conference stuff set up for the next year, but it's like you're going to have stretches where you play Alabama, Florida, Texas, Ole Miss. Like you're going to have these runs where it's like every single week is a very interesting game for the Oklahoma Sooners. And really that's what college football should be, as opposed to playing these games where you're paying the team to come to you so that you can have a game. Like play something that makes sense and is going to have something that moves the needle, not just for a regional fan base, but across the country.
I don't know, man. I always wrestle back and forth with what the right move is there, because frankly, these teams, they've been left to their. It's my biggest complaint about college football, to be honest. I probably hammer it too much on the radio, but we let these athletic directors and schools pick their own schedule, and generally they do a crappy job. They don't do themselves any favors. They don't do the fan base any favor. Like, hey, come pay a full price ticket to go watch Tulane. No knock on Tulane, right? But like, is that like a game that OU fans were like, oh man, I can't believe I get to go watch Tulane play?
Right.
Of course not. And so I think left to their own fruition, I think they're gonna default back to a little bit of the middle of the road, maybe lesser tier, easy wins. Because to your point, the big payday is the regional network that they're going to get $100 million a year, no matter what, just for being in the SEC, right? Like that's the big payday. The second big payday is the postseason, like you said. And the strength of schedule thing, I think sounds really great to us fans. But when you say like, hey, you could have 2 losses and still make it. Well, holy crap. Like if I schedule 3 easy games in the non-con, like my margin for error is so wide once I get to conference play that we always think that like, hey, they're going to worry about strength of schedule. No. If you tell them that the window is wider, they're going to make it as easy as possible, because they don't even need to win once they get in the college football playoff. But if they get one of those games, that's a big payday for the athletic department, right? If they get 2 of them, it's a big payday for the athletic department. So getting there is so much more important than making sure they get there ready to compete, which is something that fans talk about. But just bluntly, I don't know if athletic departments are in there when they're looking at their financial books going, well, are we more worried about making sure that we can keep the tennis program open and build them a new facility? Or are we worried about making sure our secondary has seen some speed? I think that's kind of the dirty truth about scheduling, is that Very rarely are the athletic departments out there being aggressive. Most of them default to assured wins, margin for error as wide as possible, because we want that paycheck at the end of the season.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because, yeah, you don't want to go through a non-conference schedule with a loss and then have 2 more in your conference schedule.
Right.
Which, I mean, the SEC is going to be a gauntlet for every single team, and Oklahoma included when they get there. And so, yeah, you're going to want kind of as little error on
Has
your
as little
schedule.
resistance, man.
Yeah.
That is the name of the game in college football.
Yeah, and I mean, we're going to get a bit of an example of it this year with UTEP and Kent State and Nebraska in the non-conference schedule.
I got the joy of covering Missouri State in person. Like, I don't watch UFC. UFC is not my thing. Like, if it's your thing, no problem. But it's just not my thing. Like, watching one guy beat up on another guy until he bleeds on the mat, it just isn't for me. Like, that's what that was like. Like, I was at that game and I felt uncomfortable. I was like, these guys don't need to be out here. They were only playing one game in the fall. Like, they just had practiced for a couple weeks and then came into Norman and played OU.
Right.
And a year they were trying to win the national title. I was like, this is not cool. And, it's a blood sport. So, I mean, it is what it is. But
Missouri State took their payday. Yeah, they took their payday. Hey, Chisholm, man, that was a lot of fun. It's great to talk schedules and talk non-conference stuff as well because, man, the future is going to look really, really interesting. And I think as early as 2023, we might see an Oklahoma move to the SEC. I know they're still talking like it's further out than that, but it just seems like everything's kind of
slow play it, man. Slow play it.
I don't know. We'll see.
I was saying, publicly, they're gonna. Oh, we're not going anywhere. We're not going anywhere.
Yeah,
we're gonna be right here.
You don't tip your hand.
No,
you
never.
keep negotiating behind closed doors. You don't tell them what you're planning on doing. So,
yeah.
All right, make sure all follow Chisholm on Twitter at Chisholm Holland. Make sure you listen to him on 107.7 The Franchise in Oklahoma City. And on the Franchise app, wherever you are. I'm sure you can find that on your App Store, Google Play Store, wherever that's at. Make sure you follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Sooners and on Facebook, Locked On Sooners Podcast. The show is free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. So for Chisholm, I'm John Williams. We'll check you next time. Boomer Sooner.